Call the meeting to order. It's the meeting of December 21st. We'll note that all commissioners are present. First item is the order of business. Are there any changes to the order of business? Hearing none.
I'll move we approve the order of business.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the order of business. Any other discussion? Hearing none, all in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. The motion carries. Second item is the consent agenda. Are there any items on the consent agenda you wish to review or discuss?
Move for approval.
We have the motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Move to the non-timetable agenda. First item we have there is a consideration of second reading and final passage of Ordinance 1373. This involves amending the hospitality tax ordinance. Before the Commission acts, I will ask if there's anyone from the public that wishes to comment further on this proposed ordinance. If so, step to the podium, state your name, we'll hear your comments. Anybody from the public? No one from the public, then we'll ask if there's any comments from city commissioners and city staff.
Mr. President,
Mr. Jackson.
I'm going to offer an amendment to the previously proposed ordinance change, and I hope I'm doing this right. But a couple things as introduction, if I may, before I do that. I stated at our last meeting that I believe that a change was needed in the current ordinance, and I still believe that a change is needed. I also believe there's a place of balance where a city commission can properly exercise its responsibility in overseeing the use of tax dollars while still empowering citizen groups to implement the mechanics of those charges. I would in fact assert that whatever the result of tonight's vote, whether we pass this or not, that we as a commission will have exercised our responsibility to act as caretakers of the taxpayers' dollars. I believe that strongly. Tonight we will make a decision on how many of those dollars will be transferred to the operating budget of the CVB. My amendment, and I'll give you the exact wording in a minute here, if approved by the rest of you, will state that the CVB would receive 10% or 100% of the or $100,000, excuse me, of the hospitality tax, whichever is less unless more is approved by the City Commission. We've talked a lot of numbers in the last few weeks, and you know, we're still only 11 months into this year, so we're still guessing about numbers. But with the amendment that I'm going to offer, I think that conservatively the CVB would in sum total receive between $340,000 and $360,000 based on 2009 numbers. If I'm right, I think their 2009 budget was about $375,000. This amendment's intended to accomplish three things. It'll provide base funding for the CVB for its operating budget, which will perpetuate some degree of autonomy with that budget. It will likely bring the CVB, either directly or through our city administrator, back to the commission to review its annual budget, because I expect that all the monies the CVB desires won't be handled with this amendment. Thirdly, it'll consummate the action of this commission in exercising its responsibility. I sense that we've got some varying opinions on the commission about this. To my fellow commissioners who are intending to vote yes on the previously proposed ordinance change, I ask you that you view this amendment as a reasonable step in rewriting the ordinance to fit current arithmetic. To those who intended to vote no, I urge you to agree that some change is needed in the ordinance and vote yes to this amendment. pass this out so we don't confuse my words. So, Mr. President, I move that the Ordinance 1373 be amended to say that a portion of the proceeds, same sentence that we've dealt with over the last few weeks here, a portion of the proceeds not less than 10% or $100,000, whichever is less, is dedicated to support of visitor attraction, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Any discussion?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner?
thank you, Commissioner Jackson. This is one issue that you know, has not been easy, and I think Mayor Johnson is on the right track with the way he wanted to, or the way he is approaching it. We do have, I don't believe we have any other organizations that we have a specific percentage like this built in. They usually come with the budget, and then and then we know what we need to make their budget work and so on. I do like the adjustment Mr. Jackson has given here. I think it's a fair way to do it now, this year anyway. And I still think we need to one, have the CVB have a seat at our table for their budgeting. And number two, in no means am I going to take this here that if they don't need additional funds, that they cannot come to us and ask for additional funds, just like some of the other trusts that we have out there, or funds out there that they know they can come to us. The Park District will be coming to us for some additional funds tonight and so on also. I'd like to leave that open so that the CVB may also be able to do that in the future. I think the 10% or the 100,000 gives them at least a number they can plug in when they do their budget. And I'd be supportive of this here, and you know, we can take a look at least another year and so on the road from there. But I can certainly support this amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Other comments?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Frenzel?
I believe that if something like this is done, I would agree that the Convention and Visitors Bureau should be involved in the budgeting process early on, not after the budget is done and be told what kind of change there is, but they need to come into it early on and begin working on their annual budget early on to coincide with ours, so that we don't have the surprises that we had this year. And I think it's going to take several years for all this to work its way out. This budget that we're talking about, this proposal that we've got tonight, will probably need to be adjusted again before too long in one way, shape, or form.
Thank you, Mr. Frenzel. Anybody else wish to comment?
Mr. President, one thing I guess I should point out, the intent here, and if the amendment's passed, is that there wouldn't be a lot of discussion at budget time without changing the ordinance again. So everybody's aware of that.
Well, in the present economic environment that we're in, there would be very little discussion at budget time, because the ordinance would allow them to get 100% of the occupancy tax and $100,000 here, because the hospitality tax in the environment that we're in, well, going to 10% actually would be less, wouldn't it? Because 10% is half.
This would be a reduction of about,
this would be $50,000.
again, depending on how you,
Today's dollars.
I'm sorry, depending on how you crunch the numbers, it would be about a $50,000 reduction next year.
So I'm expecting the occupancy tax to be next year around $300,000. So that would give them an annual income in today's dollars of roughly $350,000.
I suspect we're going to see a year from now that between the two taxes, that I don't think the CVB is going to have much of an issue with adequate operating budget.
Oh, I don't think so.
And if there is, we'll have to talk about it.
But see, that's, in effect, that's what I've been suggesting all along, is that we talk about it each year, that we set a hard number budget, not a percentage allocation, that we do talk about it, and we talk about what's going on in the community, what the needs of the community are, what are the alternatives, rather than just singling out this group and saying they get 100% of this tax and a fixed percentage of this other tax. We don't, as Commissioner Steiner says, we don't really do that with anybody else with the exception of Stark County Development. They do get a fixed amount, which I think we should change to myself. I mean, I don't think we can act on the one without acting on the other. The issue, one of the issues I have, besides not talking about this every year and making a decision based upon, again, what's going on in the economy here and our other needs, is as part of those discussions, we don't really get to express our opinions about how much money is allocated to this group. It's done by formula. And I've been, you know, harping on this for some time. I've looked at their budgets, their past budgets. Just a few weeks ago, received from Sean their 2010 budget, and next year they budgeted to spend nearly $443,000. Well, 4 years ago in 2006, we were spending $235,000. Their expense budget has grown by nearly 90% in 4 years. Behind the graph, I broke out their three major areas: administration, marketing, and personnel. And if you look at marketing in 2006 was nearly $72,000. In 2010, it's budgeted for $228,000. That's increased by a factor of just over 3 to 1. And that might be very appropriate to do. I mean, if you could make the case that says that's the appropriate thing for us to do, and then I think we have the debate, and if you make an effective case, then the budget is set for that. But I have a real problem in the environment that we're in, where much of the occupancy and the higher rates in our motels are being driven by the energy industry, to spend this kind of money on marketing. I think there are higher and better uses for it in our community. And that's the kind of discussion I want to have. But if we do it by formula, then that discussion is just kind of academic, unless you want to try and monkey with the formula, change the formula every year. So, you know, if I had to have my choice between the existing ordinance and Mr. Jackson, your amendment, you know, I would choose your amendment because it is less money. But I think the proper way to do this is really to do it annually in an open budget meeting and have the debate there. If 3 out of the 5 of us think that $443,000 is the right amount of money to spend, then you take a vote and you do it. So, I guess I don't have anything more to say. Any other comments? You have a motion before you, and then to amend the proposed ordinance. If there's no other discussion, we'll proceed to vote on that.
Mr.
Steiner?
Mayor, please. Mr. Jackson, with the 10% or the 100,000, if we apply that to the 2010 budget, that would bring it from 442 down to 390?
You have to project what we're going to see for revenue in the taxes.
In round numbers, Mr. Steiner, I think you can assume roughly $300,000 in the occupancy tax and at least $500,000 in the hospitality tax. But even if their income next year, say, is $350,000, they still could go spend the 446, because remember, they're carrying a pretty healthy cash balance. So they wouldn't be limited to their just to their income.
Mr. President, I'd just like to make a comment. On behalf of the public, I've gotten a lot of feedback regarding this issue, because it is a tough decision for us to make. But the public is telling me that they feel that CVB should come to our budget meeting once a year and ask for their additional funds that they need, just like everyone else has done. And that's the reason that I'm going to stay with the original proposal we had. It has nothing to do with the operation of the CVB or the incomes that they have and the projections they make. It's just that I feel it's more fair that you come like all the other. You have your set income, and then you come and ask for the funding each year.
Thank you, Ms. Stuckert. Anybody else? Okay. Again, we have the motion with a second to amend this ordinance, and Mr. Jackson's handed it out, so I don't think there's any need to repeat it. If we're ready, we'll begin to vote. So we'll begin with Mr. Jackson.
Aye.
Mr. Steiner.
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel.
Aye.
Ms. Stuckert.
No.
Chair votes no. The motion carries 3-2. Mr. Colling, I have a question for you. When we amend the ordinance like this, one that is, actively been before us for first and second reading and a couple of public hearings, are we free now to act on second reading and final passage, or is it best to wait a meeting and allow people a chance to think about this and comment on it further?
Mr. President, you are free to act on second reading and final passage of this ordinance at this time, having been amended. The proposed amendment by Mr. Jackson is the ordinance that's before you for second reading and final passage, and you can act on that at your pleasure.
All right. Well, then, I suspect most people would prefer we just go ahead and act on this. So the chair would entertain a motion then to approve second reading and final passage of ordinance 1373 as it's now been amended.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Frenzel?
I would move that we have the second reading and final passage of ordinance number 1373 as amended.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, discussion. There's no discussion, we'll vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Ms. Stuckert?
No.
Chair votes no. Motion carries 3-2. We have a 5:30 timetable agenda item, and that's a real estate item. And Mr. Kessel, would you introduce that?
Thank you. I'll be happy to do so, President Johnson. The purchase agreement that is before you is to purchase some land from Stark Development Corporation. The City of Dickinson gifted this land back in 1999 to facilitate some economic development project. That project, the land is no longer needed for that economic development project, and the site is the proposed site for the transit building that we've been discussing for several months. The purchase agreement is one that we have used several times in the past. The amount that was determined, the purchase price of $3,508 is the amount of property taxes that the Stark Development Corporation has expensed since they've owned the lot. That includes 2009 taxes. There are no special assessments on that property, so this would be the full asking price. The Stark Development Board has expressed or approved the purchase as long as it includes the 2009 taxes and any special assessments, and as I've said, there are none. As I said, also, the land would be used to facilitate the construction of the transit building by the North Dakota Department of Transportation.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kessel. Any comments or questions regarding this item? So you're looking for a motion to approve the purchase agreement.
That would be correct.
Is there such a motion?
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Frenzel?
I move that we approve the sale to, from Stark Development to the city.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Ms. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. I think we can slip in item B here, the under the non-timetable agenda, and this is a Department of Transportation Memorandum of Understanding for Design and Construction of a Bus Storage Facility, which is what we just talked about with the transit, right?
That is correct.
Anything that you want to, you or Mr. Colling want to say to introduce this item?
I'll certainly take a stab and then allow Mr. Colling to fill in the blanks. The Memorandum of Understanding is not a legally binding contract, but it is intended to provide some direction as to the intent of what will happen during the construction and design of the transit building or bus storage facility. This is a DOT, North Dakota DOT project, one that they will let the bids for. At the end of the construction, the City of Dickinson will be the owner of that building and that land. It would require, the Memorandum of Understanding would require a 20% commitment on behalf of the city to pay for the engineering and design of this building. I have inquired if the purchase of the land can be used in lieu of, and they have denied that request. So it would have to be cash payment, which is expected to be around $25,000 to $30,000 for design. They have allotted $1.1 million for the construction of this facility. Any dollars that would be in excess of 1.1 would be the responsibility of the City of Dickinson. Excuse me. Elder Care, who would be a leasee in the building, or leaseor in the building, has a memorandum of understanding that they have also signed and their board has already passed. Ms. Radikowski is in the audience this evening if you have any questions for that entity. The purpose for constructing the building is to facilitate a multi-county transit in the southwest area. This building would house elder care. It could house other transit-orientated businesses as that concept of incorporating other counties comes together. We are proposing that the dollars used to pay the 20% in engineering costs would come either from the contingency in 2010 or from the 30% share of the 1% dollars. That right now has a balance of just over $1.6 million. We're expecting revenue to be about $850,000 in 2010 And we have a BAC payment coming out of, or a BAC investment, excuse me, coming out of, or scheduled to come out of that fund that would equate to about $800,000. So there is an ample dollars to pay for the 20% commitment. And with that, I'll turn it over to Attorney Colling if you'd like to fill anything else.
I think Mr. Kessel covered it all. I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Mr. Steiner?
It talks about the city liable for any construction expenses beyond 1.1 million. What kind of stopgap do we have, or do we have, I mean, final approval is thus?
We will be involved, along with Elder Care, in the design of that building. Ms. Radikowski and I have discussed some of those concerns that I have about, because they're going to build a shell. They're not going to build or provide office equipment or desks or things of that nature. Our current arrangement with Elder Care does address those issues, and we've discussed that it would be similar arrangement that it is today, that those office supplies and such would be the responsibility of Elder Care to provide in the space that they occupy. If the costs go over $1.1 million, we'll know that well in advance and can make design decisions that can lower that cost. So we should be part of the discussion all the way through.
That's my concern, is that we don't have to do, send out for funds to build another President's University or home or something like that, or fund it. I just want to be, make sure that we do have a say in that.
I have purchased a home, Commissioner Steiner, so you don't have to worry about me.
Thank you.
Mr. President, I'd like to have Colleen come up and tell us how much she has increased the business in Dickinson. It's phenomenal.
Good evening, City Commissioners and Commission President. Really exciting. A lot of things have been happening with transit since April when we took over. The taxi deficit when Dakota Cab closed. Our ridership right now, we're running about 3,800 rides a month. That's one-way trips that we're doing in the town of Dickinson. So it's about a 65–70% growth for us since the first quarter of the year. This is the second time since April I'm not actually hiring just drivers and dispatchers, so it's really nice. It's been a crazy year, but very rewarding because the need is so strong out there. So I think it's going really well. The last 2 months, I think it's actually calmed down a bit from April. We're a little bit more manageable for the staff, and we're feeling a lot better with the hours. About 72 more hours a week we're covering, 10 o'clock at night every night, 1 in the morning Friday and Saturday nights. So I think it's going well. There's still a lot of room to grow, and we're going to continue to analyze what we're doing, areas that we can improve on, and make a difference for the community of Dickinson.
I want to thank you, Colleen, too, because wherever I go, I have people that can't drive compliment on the good service you're providing for them, and thanking the city for us sponsoring it too, helping along. And it doesn't matter where, if it's assisted living, group homes, wherever, people are so excited about the taxi service now being available, and even the people that want to just go out for the evening said it's nice to have a cab service back in operation that they can count on too. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we appreciate the partnership with the city. The new building, very much needed. We really need a place to house the vehicles, a storage facility, so we can take better care of them and do maintenancing on them and keep them clean. Whereas we just don't have that opportunity when we have them outside. So really appreciate the partnership with the city. The community, I know, appreciates it. We're already starting, just on the side note, we're starting to do some of those regional needs. And we're working with Williston actually today to get a lady to the train station. We're doing some coordinated travel already, which is what the state wants us to do. Talking a little bit with Beach. They're going to Bismarck for medical trips and for shopping. Is there ways that we can work with them? So I've already just started a little bit of talks with that, with some of the requests from the community to how to get people from one place to the next outside of Stark County. Any other questions?
Just, we have your commitment that we're going to build this building within budget, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I believe in budgets. I'm more interested, I mean, obviously the budget's critical. I'm very appreciative that we are a part of the design. In fact, I already have a file from the staff of things that we need, a depository outside to put the money in for safety. We're already talking about that, and we will, I'll give you that commitment along with Sean that we'll work very closely with the plans of it so that it stays within the 1.1 million.
Great. Thank you.
You bet. Anything else? All right, thank you.
That's it. So, any other comments or questions here? Could we have a motion regarding the memorandum of understanding?
I'll make a motion to approve the DOT MOU.
Is there a second?
Second.
We have the motion and the second. Other discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Got a 5:40 timetable agenda item, and this is Altig Engineering is going to present tech memo number 4. It's like a 53-page memo. I expect you to go through it page by page. Mr. Rapp, did you want to say anything to introduce Altig? Or Mr. Soren, you may have some introductory remarks.
Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to take the opportunity to introduce and thank Altig Engineering for their work they've done over the past year in evaluating our facility, both from the equipment standpoint, processes, and the facility as a whole. Tonight, Carl Olson from Altig Engineering will present tech memo number 4. We'll just look at basically what our processes are, what their alternative analysis is, and what their recommendations are for improvement to our wastewater treatment process. Mrs. Olson has a master's in environmental engineering from University of North Dakota, and I will let her take it.
So we know she's well-educated then, so welcome.
I don't know if we should start that because I know some of the background here. But anyway, thank you very much for having us back. It's our pleasure to be here tonight to talk about what's really the culmination of the study we've been doing for the past, I suppose, 9 months to getting close to a year. A brief overview of the presentation. First of all, an introduction, just to talk again about the process, to remind everyone how we got to this point here tonight, and review of existing conditions, some of the review of facility performance, some of those things I talked about last time I was here, and some of the previous technical memoranda we presented, existing facility deficiencies, alternative analysis, our recommendations, and put that into a capital improvements plan. Again, to review, the facility in Dickinson consists of preliminary treatment, which is screening and grit removal, followed by a master lift station, which pumps the wastewater to the aeration ponds for biological treatment. After that, there's a series of 4 stabilization ponds, followed by discharge to the river or irrigation, depending on time of year and other constraints with the irrigation process. The facility master plan that we're doing and capital improvements plan, we broke it into 4 technical memoranda. Last time I was here, I talked about tech memos 1, 2, and 3, which went through the existing conditions, our performance to date, looked at future population growth and projections of flows and loadings, any regulatory requirements that may be coming in the next design period of 20 years. We did an equipment evaluation of the existing facilities and presented that to you. And the last technical memoranda that I'm here to talk about tonight just talks about the culmination, what this means for you moving into the future, the projects that you should look at, and alternatives, analysis, and cost estimates. First of all, to recap the existing conditions, again, the flow at 1.75 MGD is below design, but at 80%, so we're getting close to the original design. BOD loading, however, in 2009 was at 99% of the design, which actually at about 80%, a lot of times the regulatory agencies will say you need to start looking and planning because these things take a while. So we're right there for loading. And then the other thing is the total suspended solids, ammonia and TKN. There were no original design numbers for these things. However, we did notice they were higher than what the normal published ranges are. We talked about this last time and tried to look for why that may be, maybe some of the industry in town. Without a real analysis of the different basins in the collection system, it's hard to exactly pinpoint what that might be. So if that's a concern for the city, that might be an idea moving forward, is looking at these individual areas in your collection system. It's not so high that it's caused concern at the plant, just higher than what you'd see in a published typical range.
Mrs. Olson,
Yeah.
for members of our community who might be viewing this and may not know what BOD stands for, can you tell them?
Sure, yeah, biochemical oxygen demand, and it's a long name for basically the strength of the wastewater. So that's just the parameter in wastewater industry that you use to determine strength and removal, treatment removal, and treatment efficiencies. And again, the other parameters are just regulated parameters in the city's permit, and those are the things we want to treat so that the permit, discharge permit is met.
So when we're at 99% BOD loading capacity in layperson's terms, what does that mean?
That means that the facility was designed to treat a number of pounds of BOD, which means the strength of the wastewater. So just when you design a facility, you look at the strength expected and you treat to that level. So it basically means we're at where they determined the design strength to be. So that means the aeration system is at capacity, the facility is at capacity, and I can move on to the next. So far, the removal percentages have been good. However, again, when you're at capacity, that's when it becomes harder to meet your discharge permit. Odors may develop. If a facility is overloaded to the point that the aeration equipment can't handle it, you can get a lack of treatment and odors. So that's why we try to keep it within the design parameters. To date, the city has done some things in the last 10 years with the existing infrastructure, added some new aeration processes. So you have been able to keep within good percent removals, and you have been able to meet your discharge permit. Again, however, moving forward, when you're at nearly 100%, you're kind of working on borrowed time, don't know how long that's going to continue when you're pushing your equipment to the limit like that. So that's what we did the previous tech memos, and now based on that, we identified 6 areas of deficiencies in the system, just to try to categorize them to move forward and start looking at alternatives. The first category is hydraulic deficiencies, meaning can you transport the wastewater, the certain flow into your facility? Do you have the proper storage required by the state? Any of the hydraulic issues going on. The next item is organic loading. Again, that's when we talk about BOD or strength of the wastewater. Again, we're at 99%, so we felt that was a deficiency that we needed to look at moving forward. Ammonia limit, the city has an ammonia limit, and right now there's times they meet it, times they don't. However, you have storage capacity to get you through to times when you do meet it. However, there's no treatment in the system, and so it's very difficult for the operators to rely on treatment, and I'll talk about that more later. The next one, future regulations. The Department of Health in North Dakota sets regulations for your permit, and that comes down from the United States EPA, Environmental Protection Agency. And to date, there's nothing that the state foresees. However, we see some things going on nationally that we wanted to look at in case this does filter down into your permit and the next or even the following permit cycle. So we wanted to look at some future regulatory things that may happen. Facility condition, wastewater is a very harsh environment, so there's a lot of corrosion and condition things that happen when facilities are in operation for a number of years. And then odor control, I know that's a concern for the city, and that's an area that we looked at as well, some alternatives for odor control. The first area of hydraulic deficiencies, The chart here shows the different areas that we looked at, all your transfer piping, your pumping capacity, and these are the constraints we found. The first item is the cell 3 transfer piping, which actually that project just bid, I think, a week or two ago. So that's already in the works through the ERA funding, low-interest loan program they had going. Some other areas I show the limitation is what your capacity is of each individual thing, and the minimum value required reflects either for operational purposes or in the instance of 9.97 MGD, the 20-year flow projected. So the 27-inch pipe, the 21-inch pipe, they're close to the 20-year projection we want to see, but not quite there. Where the real constraint is the master lift force main and the master lift station. And without capacity for that, we can't get the water physically into the aeration ponds. And a lot of times when we're above that flow, you bypass to a stabilization pond, which just really doesn't have the treatment capacity, and you can see odors and things like that. So we want all the flow to get into your aeration ponds. And then there's some other transfer piping constraints that you don't get 6 inches per day, but that really has not been, according to the operators, a problem to date. Here are the alternatives we looked at for the hydraulic constraints. Doing nothing, again, we want to be able to move water through your facility so we get adequate treatment. So we thought the do nothing alternative should not be undertaken by the city. We looked at rehabbing the existing lift station, trying to use your existing infrastructure and not build a whole new master lift station, and just replacing the piping where we'd need to. And then as another alternative, we looked at constructing a new master lift station. And I'll include costs for this, talk about them a little bit later. But those are the alternatives we looked at. Now the organic deficiencies, which means the ability to treat the wastewater, the strength of wastewater. Again, we're at design. We need about another 2,000 pounds per day to get into the 20-year design life that we're looking at. The equipment is run at full capacity. And the other issue with the aeration system is there's no redundancy, meaning if one of the pieces of equipment goes out of service, there's not a backup there to take over, and you're left with no aeration, which means a pond with no aeration that could go septic and cause odors, and I think that's happened in the past, just until we could get some replacement equipment going or fixed. Again, organic loading constraints, we're looking at adding capacity by 2,100 pounds per day for the design life. And all of the systems considered included the capacity to treat this much, this organic loading, the reliability to treat, and redundancy in the system. So the first one we looked at is using your existing, what happened there, existing OGen unit. It's a pure oxygen generator with some floating diffusers and some solar-powered circulators as mixers. And the next alternative is a diffuser blower system. Again, submerged fine bubble diffusers. They have a higher transfer efficiency for oxygen. There's a close-up. And an ambient air blower, either single stage or turbo blower. They basically use ambient air to the diffusers for treatment. The next treatment technology we looked at was a hybrid type. So you use your existing ponds, but yet include mechanical treatment plant items. So like City of Mandan, North Dakota has a similar facility. You add aeration, you add a clarifier, but then whenever you add a clarifier and some of the more mechanical treatment plants, you have sludge production that you have to treat and dispose of according to state and federal regulations. So there's a BioLac type facility or a Lemna type facility on the market. And the last alternative for treatment technology is a full-blown mechanical plant. There are numerous options. A couple we looked at were an oxidation dish facility or a sequencing batch reactor, very common in this part of the country, used throughout North Dakota and Minnesota. The next item is deficiencies due to the ammonia limit constraints. The state law has a formula for calculating what the ammonia limit is leaving a facility. And in some watersheds, it's not a problem. In others, it can be. Because the Heart River can have a high pH combined with low flow conditions at times, there's times where the ammonia limit can be very low and can't be met by the facility. Now, when all of a sudden there's higher flow in the river or dilution water, then the city can discharge, or if the pH drops, the city can discharge. So it's really a balancing act for the operators to be able to meet the ammonia limit, since there's no treatment technology in the system. The first thing we looked at is purchasing water from Lake Patterson. There's a chart of this on page 23 in the tech memo, if you can see the numbers a little more clearly. We looked at about 10 milligrams per liter is what we feel comfortable with as an average that the city can meet. You can see in your tech memo that at 10 milligrams per liter, by the time the red line reaches above that shaded 10 milligrams per liter, we need to purchase 60 CFS of dilution water. And as you can see in your tech memo, that comes at a pretty high price tag. Just due to the reoccurring nature of purchasing water and not having any capital improvements at the end, it comes with a pretty hefty price tag, which we'll show later. The next thing is a hybrid mechanical plant. There are treatment technologies, like I talked about earlier, that can provide ammonia reduction in the system. Either adding an external clarifier and having a return of activated sludge type process to your existing plant, or converting to a biolac type treatment. There's media type treatment that you can use. Moorhead, Minnesota does this to meet their ammonia limit. It provides a media surface for these bacteria to grow on that help with nitrification without getting too much in depth of the technology of it. And there's also curtains that you can hang to provide that surface area for the bacteria. There's a mechanical plant, which I talked about earlier. There's controls that you can do to cycle through different tanks to promote nitrification. And the other one we analyzed isn't necessarily a treatment technology, but it's eliminating the discharge and going with more of a land application type, such as rapid infiltration basins. You have a percolation through the ground, and you have such a good separation here to groundwater that you use that ground and the different layers of soil to help treat. Yeah.
So when the alternative in terms of eliminating discharge, by that you mean we wouldn't discharge at all into the Heart River?
Right, right.
Okay.
Yep, and we could still keep your discharge permitted, so if all of the things fall in the right place with pH and dilution water in the river, and if this facility could discharge, they still could, but under conditions where they couldn't, they could go to a land application type treatment, and there's no monitoring for ammonia when you do land application. So it's not necessarily an ammonia removal technology, but it's an alternate disposal technology. And a lot of places who have, in Minnesota, the trout streams or lakes, they've totally not let anyone discharge to those anymore, and they go to some kind of land application, either through these rapid infiltration basins. And the reason I say that is because your soils here look to be favorable. They have to be, sandy and gravelly and able to percolate through the soils. Or what you're doing now, expanding your irrigation facilities.
Okay, so we would treat the water the same way,
Yep.
the wastewater we do now, through the various holding ponds
Yep.
and the aeration, all that, except you get down to the final step,
And you would land apply.
you'd
Yes.
land apply, but we would, as you said, we could keep the permits
Yep.
up to date, and we could discharge into the river if we,
If you could,
If we could,
limit-wise,
yeah.
yep, if
Okay.
everything works out.
all right.
And we'll talk about costs for this later, but it's really become a necessity in some areas where the surface waters, the limits are just, too stringent, and the costs to treat to that level are astronomical. And it's become a very popular, almost a resurgence. They were doing this a lot in the 70s. Even your old overland flow site is some variation of that. So
My question was going to be on the irrigation.
Yep.
Do we have any potential to increase the volume of irrigation without extensive pumping?
Well, I believe you did acquire some land to the south of Cell 4. However, I don't believe your existing pumping facility would allow that, and maybe Skip can, that's correct? You would need a new pump station for irrigation.
We just have to pump a lot farther.
Yes.
Yeah.
And as far as a municipality and land application, it's always more favorable to land apply on land that you own, because you're more concerned about getting rid of water, whereas if it's a farmer's land and you're irrigating, you're at their mercy for the small amounts that you may be able to discharge according to what they feel they want. And crop type also very much impacts that. So if it's your land, you can choose a crop type more feasible for irrigation where it's someone else's land. That's the real caveat with irrigation if you don't own the land. You're kind of at the farmer's mercy. So.
Are there, excuse me, I have one more question.
Yeah.
In the land application of that volume, does it eliminate odor issues, or would they still remain?
Well, by that time, it will still go through your whole process, so you'd still have everything you currently do. And by that time, it would be treated. Because what's required is not testing before you go to the land application site, but you do have to monitor groundwater. So if you're not treating before you go to that land application, you could negatively impact groundwater. So that's why we would want to continue treatment as it is. So that in itself would not change anything in your process upstream of the discharge. It's just instead of going to the river, you know, you would be going to land application site. The next deficiency area is future regulations. And there was a TMDL, which is a total maximum daily load study, basically analyzing the loadings coming to a river and how that's impacting river quality. On the Hart River, not at Dickinson itself, but this was the only area that the Department of Health could point us in the direction of possible future limits coming down from the state or the federal EPA. So in that study, it targeted phosphorus and total suspended solids. So those are two areas we wanted to look at should that ever come up. But they didn't see any changes in your next permit cycle as far as different constituents such as that. However, we did want to look at a national level and see what's going on in other states. Sometimes that can predict what may happen 5-10 years down the line in North Dakota. So we looked at some other things such as mercury and the endocrine disrupting chemicals. That's maybe something you've heard in the news lately. And the other thing that the state has said that will impact the facility is right now you have a French drain from Cell 4 that continually runs. And right now it's just permitted as a controlled discharge. However, the state would permit that as a continuous discharge. So you'd have to meet limits out of that drain at all times, which according to records to date you can't do. So we have to do something different there. So I'll talk about that. And in your tech memo, I went through a lot of different treatment technologies for different things. Phosphorus, you can add chemical to precipitate out that phosphorus. Solids, you can do filters. Total nitrogen, you'd have to go past the step of nitrification, which is ammonia to nitrate. Past that to denitrification, which is off-gassing nitrogen, that to meet that limit. Mercury, a lot of times source reduction or filtration, and emerging contaminants, that's the real hot button, which is in research and development stage nationwide, different technologies. And then I talk about the French drain, which it's necessary so that the Cell 4 pond, the dike, we have concerns if we just plug that it would not be stable enough, the dike itself. So we would look at just taking what's coming out of the French drain and pumping it back into Cell 4 itself. Deficiencies due to condition. We did, again, in Tech Memo 3, a detailed evaluation of the different equipment out at the facility, and we included the summary of that on page 7 in this recent tech memo. Basically, we went through, and this is a summary of what we feel needs attention or needs some alternative analysis for moving on to the future. Emergency power is one thing I do want to talk about. Right now, if power goes out for extended period of time, the master lift station, you know, we can't pump water into our facility, and we're at the risk of bypassing until someone can get a generator out to get it going again. Or your aeration system. It doesn't take long for a deep cell like you have to go septic, and we could have odor issues. So we'd look at putting some permanent generators out on the site to keep the critical facilities operational during a power outage. Other things, master lift station pumps, the aeration, the east aerator, some of the different issues with the condition or reliability, redundancy, safety, things such as that. Again, emergency power, the lift station pumps, the problem with that is there's no redundancy. The dry well, this is not your facility, but it's a similar one that we've done. The problem is there's no stairway, there's a small hatch to get down into the pump dry well where the pumps are located, which with confined space issues and safety for operators, having an external stairway that they can access and get at the equipment and get in a hoist that they can get in and out is something that we'd look at moving forward. And then some of the other things we looked at as flow meters for accurate flow measurement, very important for permitting and design of improvements. The final area is odor control. And the first alternative we always look at is what to do with odor control as a citywide item. Basically, when you have a pond system in the spring, you have that turnover. You have an ice cap on a pond, and it becomes anaerobic in the winter, which produces sulfides. Then when that melts, that's released into the atmosphere and can cause odors. Now, Dickinson has aerated ponds that keep them open all year round, keep treatment. So moving forward, one of the treatment for odor is looking at having redundancy in aeration so it doesn't cause any equipment outing, doesn't cause any odors, any problematic odors. I can go into that one. Looking at pond covers, is there a way we can contain that and not let that spring turnover come out when the ice melts? Oops, excuse me. And chemical addition, is there any chemical, there's a lot of them on the market for adding chemical to help reduce the dissolved sulfides and hydrogen sulfide production. And a scrubber, for a scrubber, like a carbon scrubber, you'd need to have that in a confined space where you can capture all the air. So we look at that in pre-treatment. And I'll talk about costs for that.
I have a question.
Yep.
With the odors, and I read your memo, and I understand if we have more redundancy with aerators, we have a better chance of controlling those odors. In the spring, when the ice goes and these turn over, are we always going to have that even if we have redundancy with aerators?
With the redundant equipment up front, what we would look at is designing all of our removal of the wastewater strength up front. So then when you go to those cells that aren't aerated, you're not going to those cells with a high wastewater strength. And that will greatly reduce,
Reduce the odor.
Yeah,
Okay.
like a regular lake, that freezes over and then it thaws. Well, that's, doesn't have the hydrogen sulfide producing bacteria like a wastewater pond. So if we can get our treatment up front, that will help that immensely.
And where we have odors at other times than just the spring of the year when things turn over, and I gather from reading the memo, that occurs like if we have a maintenance issue and some equipment's down, aeration equipment's down, then our ponds can go septic, and that's where we get the odors.
Right.
Or if we had a power outage
Exactly.
That for an extended period of time, the same thing happens. So what you're talking about is, let's have some backup generators to deal with that. Let's have redundancy on
Right.
the aerator side, so we can pull something out and do preventive maintenance on it and still aerate the ponds.
Yes.
Did I get it right? Is that what-
Exactly.
Okay.
You should have taken that last part that I just.
No, I'm just,
That's exactly right.
That's okay.
You know, and I'll talk about the cost for some odor control alternatives, because they're really, you know, odor control is something that's very hot button right now with a lot of people. And you can go as far or doing things like we're talking about here, and it becomes on a tolerance on a city, you know, commission type level on, you know, doing things like this will greatly reduce the potential for odor. So I'll talk about cost in a minute. The next item, estimates of cost. Again, with the hydraulic constraints, we looked at a new master lift station. That just doesn't make financial sense. We looked at rehabbing. Again, we're able to use your existing infrastructure. That's why that looks a lot more favorable cost-wise.
I've got a question.
Yep.
Why do you say the new master lift station doesn't make financial sense? I see it costs nearly $2 million more, but why doesn't it make financial sense?
Well, we are able to do everything we need to do in rehabbing the master lift station that we would for a new master lift station. We talked about doing a new master lift station, a whole new structure over by pretreatment, and there really weren't any benefits to that versus rehabbing what you have on your existing system, putting in new pumps, just updating the piping and everything else. We were able to get what we need as far as 20-year design with just the rehabilitation.
So
And
that we would have a 20-year life rehab?
Yes.
And if we built new, the life wouldn't be much more than 20 years? anyway?
Right. You know, we would design the rehabilitation to last the same time as the new.
Okay.
So, and the condition of the facility with just some improvements to access and things like that could be done. So.
Okay.
So what you're saying is that the existing lift station is structurally sound?
Yes, yes. There was no need that, no need to abandon it at this time. We were able to get our 20-year design with the existing facility, and no real benefits occurred when going to a new lift station.
Was this the facility that you had some safety concerns about?
Just with the access.
So
Yes.
by rehabbing, can you mitigate some of those safety concerns? too?
Yes, with doing an external type stairway to be able to maintain the pumps and get down in the lower level.
Okay.
And then the new storage pond, I touch on that quickly. Under a controlled discharge, you have to store your water for 180 days, according to the state. And if we didn't go to some kind of effluent discharge other than the river, you may need to build a new storage pond when you get to that storage capacity. However, by doing the land application, rapid infiltration basins, or further irrigation, that's decreasing the amount of storage you need, so that wouldn't be necessary. So here we looked at rehabbing the master lift station as the recommended alternative. The next, organic loading constraints area. It's a little bit of a busy slide, but we did not only a capital cost analysis, we looked at the ancillary process needed. For example, if you go to a mechanical plant, it's not just the organic treatment capacity you have to add. You would need an upgrade to the pretreatment. You'd need sludge digestion or treatment. You'd need sludge storage and sludge disposal. So there's an additional cost to going to a new treatment technology for some of them. The other thing we looked at was an annual O&M cost, what this is going to cost you to run every year, and then we made that into a total present worth. So the total present worth isn't what you pay out of pocket up front, but it gives you an apples to apples comparison of a 20-year design life for a particular alternative. So the first one is upgrade existing aeration equipment. It's not at a capacity that we could get to the next 20-year design. So we'd look at using similar equipment to what you have, retrofitting that into the east aeration pond and adding a new aeration pond to add the capacity we need. Using ambient air blowers in lieu of the pure oxygen generator with more of a submerged fine bevel diffuser. Looking at the hybrid pond or mechanical plant where you use your existing ponds but retrofit it with more of a mechanical plant type process. And then finally the full-blown mechanical plant. And based on the cost analysis, the ambient air blower and fine bubble diffusers had the lowest present worth and capital cost. I should say it was very close to upgrading your existing equipment. If you were to proceed with this, a more detailed cost analysis could be done since they're very close in costs at this point. But for now, the lowest appeared to be ambient air blowers and fine bubble diffusers. And again, that would provide complete redundancy to the system.
On that one, if finances weren't a big issue, what would you prefer, the upgrading the existing equipment or the ambient air blowers? Which do you think is more appropriate for Dickinson?
The ambient air blowers with the submerged diffusers are probably a less maintenance intensive type system because you don't have as many things to maintain. With the existing system, there's the pure oxygen generator that you maintain. There's the floating diffusers to maintain and operate. Both of those have to be an electrical cost. And then there's the mixing process, which also they're solar powered, so you don't have the costs for that operationally, but it's something to maintain and replace moving forward. With the ambient air blowers, you have a blower and a submerged diffuser, which does not have any, there's some maintenance to those, but it's not a power consumption. And they're operator friendly, and we've used quite a few of those. So that would be my recommendation. The next item, the ammonia limits. Again, talking about a 20-year water purchase, I looked at discharging twice a year with the approximate amount of water you'd have to purchase, and then made a present worth of that in today's cost, and it was over $12 million, which then at the end of the 20 years you have nothing, whereas you'd have some infrastructure if you did a capital improvement project, such as the others listed. The hybrid treatment plant, again, that was using your ponds with mechanical plant type processes. The media process, which is a tertiary type treatment at the end of your plant that you would add to your existing facility. So all of these are items that would have to be done to meet an ammonia limit reliably every time you need to discharge. The one we talked about in detail was to eliminate the discharge by rapid infiltration basins. And that right now appears to be a little more operator friendly versus the land application, because there are so many crop growing constraints, and especially, like I said, if you have a farmer that you're trying to work with, it can be difficult to discharge the amount you need. The RIBs are very low maintenance. You discharge water to them and you let that seep into the ground. There's nothing else to do besides that.
Is there room on site to do it?
We would look at doing a portion of it by, let's see, the north side of Cell 4, which is where your old overland flow site was. And then as a phased approach, that would be phase 1. And then the land you own to the south would be the other site if necessary. The problem with rapid infiltration basins, you don't know exactly the capacity they'll be until you do a detailed geotechnical analysis with soil borings, and then they flood them to test them. So you estimate the permeability of the soil, how fast you'll drain in, and the time till it will get to the groundwater. But until you actually flood that basin, that's how they permit them on how much it can actually handle. So you do your conservative engineering estimates, and then you have a real-life test before you permit it. So the cost is a very conservative estimate right now, and again, until some detailed soils analysis were done, the cost would probably drop. But we're looking at, again, as a phase one, the site to the south. Or north, excuse me, north. Again, that not only is that the lowest cost, it also helps with some of the other constraints, such as storage in the system. And what I'm going to talk about next is future regulatory constraints. Should some of these happen in the next 20 years, we did run some cost estimates based on some other facilities we've done. We don't foresee any of these happening. The Department of Health didn't foresee them, except for the French drain to cell 4. Now, the nice thing, like I said, about the rapid infiltration basins is that if some of these permits did come statewide, you're land applying, you're not discharging to a surface water, so you wouldn't have to worry about them. So that's a benefit to the RIBs. Facility age and constraints. These are the items we felt were in need of upgrades based on the condition or constraints. Again, some of them, such as master lift station pump redundancy, that was considered under the hydraulic, being able to pump the wastewater. So it's just a doubled here just because it is a condition and redundancy issue as well. And the east aerator, that was considered elsewhere. So the ones highlighted here are the new ones in the list. And finally, odor control. Again, looking at aeration equipment redundancy is the recommended alternative for odor control, just due to the costs of covering the ponds for the entire facility. Chemical addition, that's a constant cost throughout the year. And just because you've done chemical addition at the front of the plant doesn't mean that when those ponds freeze and turn over, you would be odor-free completely. And to date, there have been no complaints or issues with the pretreatment area and generating odors. So that was not included at this time. But should that change, that's something that could be looked at. Having that redundancy and having the capacity to treat the strength in those front ponds is really what's going to help you in the downstream ponds that freeze and then turn over. Again, here's the summary of the recommendations. After looking at all these things, we tried to start to prioritize moving forward, because I know that's a big pill to swallow with all these different improvements ahead. So what we looked at was a capital improvements plan, trying to rank what we felt was most important, and then that would allow you to try to fit it into the budget, because we understand there's not a money tree anywhere, so it's nice to be able to rank them and do them as you can budgetary moving forward. And we looked at populations as well. I know some of the difficulties with a booming population, trying to tie a year to that. So what we looked at as our first 5 years, it does depend on population growth. It's basically to a population of about 22,000. The first item is the primary pond aeration and a new pond to meet that organic loading, because we are at 99%. And that also would help having redundancy and odor control. We feel that's a priority. The next item, which is driven by your permit, is upgrading that French drain so that it will be pumped back into the cell 4 and not discharged to the river. New flow meters at an area where you can monitor your flow for your permitting purposes and future design of different systems coming in was the next one. And then the phase 1 rapid infiltration basins, which is basically to the north and your overland flow site, eliminating your discharge, and so you don't have that ammonia limit constraint. And then the next two are from the equipment evaluation, control structures, and emergency power. And then moving forward from 22,000 population into the future, that's where your master lift station starts to reach its capacity. So you wouldn't be able to get all the wastewater into your facility. And some of the issues with the accessibility to the pumps, when you do the lift station improvements, that would be the time to improve some of that accessibility. And then that's the time when that rapid infiltration to the south would come into play. And the reason that's so much higher is because you'd be a new pump station to get the treated water there. And likely would also mean some maybe ground watering wells and it's some other things that may be required in the permit. And then the last one is a river monitoring station. That right now isn't a problem. However, the structure where they monitor the river flow has been starting to tip. It depends on spring ice, how ice hits it in the spring, what kind of runoffs you see in the spring, how long that will last. So that may or may not be moved up depending on how long that lasts. So. And I believe that's everything.
So that total is just shy of $9 million.
Yes.
And I think I read in here where you commented something to this effect that, there might be some cost advantages, though, to doing everything at once. I think you wrote about you could eliminate some contractor mobilization costs and stuff. I mean, so when you look at these projects, would it be, from a contractor's perspective, would they like to see all this lumped together, or do you think they'd prefer it in two phases like this?
Well, I'm sure a contractor would like to get it all at once. And the things you would save on our mobilization, they'd only have to bring their things to the site once. Some things are fixed, like bond, getting their performance and payment bonds. That's just directly on the cost of the contract. But as far as only applying for a loan package once, some of the different costs incurred with the construction management, bidding process, that kind of thing, that can be saved as well. So, it's sometimes difficult to quantify the savings doing it as one project, but I know not having to mobilize to the site, and a lot of times economy of scale too, and maybe you'll get a bigger contractor looking at it, or more contractors, and people would get more sharpen their pencil more, having more generals looking at it.
How long do if this was one project from the time they took the first shovelful of dirt till the time they were done, I mean, roughly how long do you think a project like this takes?
I would say 2 construction seasons. A lot of it is outside work. With a good construction season, they could get a lot done. However, we would probably leave it open for 2 construction seasons with all reality. So you look at planning, a lot of times that will be, 1 a year and getting your funding set up, and then bidding the next year, and probably 2 years to get that done. So you're probably looking 3 to 4 years from the time of planning, design, loan application, funding, securing, bidding, construction.
Well, I thought Altig would finance this for us. No?
Me personally.
No. Well, I had another question. We'll come back.
Let me jump in.
Go ahead.
I thought I saw it the first time I went through, and now I can't find it. But these numbers are not just construction. There is an engineering allowance in there,
yes,
contingency.
Great percentages, yes.
Okay. They're today's dollars, of course.
Yes.
So if we didn't do anything for 2
Correct.
years, they're going to be different numbers.
Correct.
Okay. Eligible for SRF, EPA monies.
Yes.
And am I right that during this time of stimulus, some of that SRF money turned into grant money? Did it not?
Yes, for some communities. I can only speak, I guess, to what happened about a year ago. Well, a year ago would be in February. The state had 1% loans for communities larger than, I can't remember the threshold, if it was 10,000 people or so. which is what your transfer cell project was a 1% loan. For some of the smaller facilities, they did a 50% grant and 50% 3% loan.
But that was only smaller communities.
Those were smaller communities
Okay.
in that first round.
Okay. Some of the things that I saw happen, that it seemed that happened in Washington in the last couple of weeks, looks like there could be more money
They're
that we might
talking
call
about-
stimulus.
Yes, and we've seen some things through the Water Environment Federation or the kind of the wastewater national
So are there
entity.
some of these 10 items that could be gotten ready fast enough to act with any stimulus money that might come along?
Definitely.
Emergency power maybe and some
That
things
would
like that?
definitely be one, yes.
Okay. What about energy impact money? Do you think that with the growth around Dickinson, we could make a case for energy impact money?
Energy impact money. I think with a lot of the things going on here, yes, there's different, not only energy impact, but economic development and a lot of the things driven by industry that we could look at for some potential grants, because it is so based on
I'm thinking specifically about tying it to any growth that
Growth
we will
with the oil
hopefully
industry,
prove
energy
in the next
industry.
few months here, hopefully. Okay, thank you.
Yes, it'd be a great opportunity for going after whatever kind of grants I think are out there.
The rapid infiltration basins, how long would it take us to do the proper testing to get an answer there? Because reading the memo and listening to your comments, it sure sounds like that's what you're suggesting we do, provided the soils
Right.
allow us to do it, but,
Well, it would be a geotechnical firm that we'd have come in and take some soil borings, and they would be able to turn that around in a month or two, usually.
that's a pretty quick process.
Yes.
And that's probably not real expensive to get that.
No, not at all.
I guess I'd be curious to hear Mr. Soren or Mr. Rapp's kind of reaction to possibly going that direction. I mean, is that something that after you've been involved in this study that you think sounds pretty good to you, or do you have any feelings on that? Or opinions? I'm sure you guys have feelings, but we're not going to talk about those tonight.
Good.
Well, I guess when we had talked about this initially, it sure seemed like a good opportunity or good alternative for the situation that we have in hand to look at, especially when we purchased some of that additional land south of the wastewater facility. It gave us some area to work with and look at doing. So I certainly think it's worth us exploring and seeing what our opportunities are there.
When we've talked about this previously, before the Altig study, was that ever brought up? I don't remember that being brought up as an option. Yeah.
Not that I'm aware of. I don't know if Mr. Rapp had any. I do know, as we were going through this, that it was a topic that was brought up, and we met at one of our conventions that we were at and started discussing it a little further as maybe an alternative that we should look at as a possibility to remedy some of the concerns we have going forward.
A question for Mr. Rapp. Roughly how many households right now are paying a fee for wastewater disposal?
President Johnson, we've got a little over 6,100 homes in Dickinson right now that are on our wastewater.
Okay.
If I could elaborate a little bit too, is how we kind of got on the topic of the rapid infiltration basins. Overland flood, when that was designed in 1984, was kind of a combination of both an RIB, because of the permeable soils that are out there, and then plus the overland treatment part of it. So the rapid infiltration basin specifically has not been discussed before, but that was a process we'd used all the way back from 1984.
Okay.
And looking at the land that was there, it was very conducive to do kind of a phase one part of it, and then looking at that land when we bought that 4 or 5 years ago, that's what the direction we went with that was having the ability to expand our system to the south or to another direction.
So when we bought this land, I can't even remember now if it was 2 years ago or 4 years ago, but whenever that was, were you thinking about it in terms of maybe using it for this sort of process, or?
President Johnson, actually what I was really looking at the time was there's a drainage area that goes through the center part of that land that encompasses about 140 some acres. Of looking at some low head check dams, and it's very similar to what the RIBs would be. As it slowly travels through that drainage area and stuff too, it would be treated, soak into the ground, and then whatever we didn't treat would be either returned back to the system or discharged to the Heart River.
Okay.
But because of the way the owner had it, they pretty much wanted to sell the entire property as a whole and not just that small section.
So you've had something similar to this as in the back of your mind as possible alternative then? And
Yes.
so what do you think of this suggestion?
The RIB,
Yeah.
that was something we discussed, as Mr. Soren said, quite in depth, and was a direction we thought would be a good way to go. Eliminates a lot of the constraints from an environmental standpoint, with other than having to do groundwater monitoring, where you don't have to deal with the flows and constraints of the Heart River.
I was just going to ask, are we worried about the rapid infiltration getting to the Heart River? Monitor that?
Yeah, that's what the groundwater wells would be, and basically what you need to treat is, a lot of times you worry about is nitrates and chlorides, which is what you'd worry about in any groundwater well a lot of times. So that's part of the permeability aspect. You want it permeable, but not too permeable. You want it to filter somewhat slowly, not directly into the groundwater. But we've seen them used even when groundwater was 5 or 6 feet below the surface, which here it's, according to some old soil borings, I think 20 feet. So, and likely even more if you go up on the hill to the south.
It seems that
Go ahead.
It seems that getting on the priority list for SRF funding would be an immediate desire, even if we may not ever use it.
There's no commitment that you have to do the project in, a year or 10 years. You can get on the list, and when or if you're ready to move forward, you're there, and you would know once you're on the list that the money is available for you.
Commissioner Jackson, as part of the first go-around, we did submit in that proposal stuff too to look at upgrades to aeration, the standby power, and I'm not sure what else. There was one other item that we submitted as part of that request.
I remember that. Yeah.
But the $2 billion plus is going to go nationwide that just came out as possible SRF funding. They'll go through the same process. We'll basically submit a proposal to the state on what projects we want to fund and what those items are, and then they pick from that list of submittals.
So we want to have these 10 items on the priority list, would we not? On the state?
Not
state
entirely,
priority.
no. But the aeration and standby power were submitted the last go-around. But we would resubmit the entire package or what we would want submitted on that list again.
I have a question for you, Skip, on the influx of all of the population increase we're having, including the motels. Have you noticed a lot of difference? I know in the spring we always have this horrible problem of odor, for one thing. And that's one thing that we need to do away with because it's almost intoxicating.
I'm not sure what your question was, Commissioner
Well,
Curtis.
What is the priorities? Of course, they're all are for the project, but
Okay. I guess this goes back to kind of what my number one priority was from quite a while too, is looking at expanding and upgrading our aeration. On your front end of it too, the more you can treat on the head end of it, the less problems you have downstream. If we can reduce the strength of stuff to go, that's like entering the primaries. And that's what we did 5 years ago with that pilot project, and the upgrades we've done is reduce the loading that's gone into those primaries. And that's why you've seen, we still have some odors in the spring of the year, but you have not seen the same type of odors that we've had, years past when they were 4, 5, 6 weeks long. I think last year we had about 3 days.
That's good.
The risk, as I understand it, though, is not so much that spring turnover now. It's if you have to take any of your aerators out for maintenance purposes, whether it's a breakdown or preventive maintenance, then we run the risk of introducing the odor problem. And that's, so the issue of redundancy becomes
Correct.
quite important. I'm just doing back of the envelope type of calculations, and we should double check this obviously, but if we have a $9 million project and we have 6,000 households, I think that comes out to $1,500 a household, I think.
Over 20 years?
No, 50, I mean, if you did a special assessment in a sense, I think you'd have to special assess $1,500 a household for $9 million. Well, if you do, so if it's $1,500 a household, and we said, look, we'll just assume for a moment that we're the federal government and we'll get a zero-interest loan for 20 years, so we won't have any interest. That's $75 a year then per household to do this. Now, we know we're not going to get financing for zero, but Mr. Jackson's done a pretty good job with his line of questioning here that I think would give us hope that there are monies out there that either will come with very low interest or come as outright grants. So, you know, we can reduce the effective capital cost, in a sense, to the citizens. But I guess my initial reaction here, where I'm going with this, is I don't think we should just automatically rule out doing this in one phase, because it looks to me, again, on the back of the envelope, we could finance this, and it would, and just assuming if our citizens who are the users here had to bear this entire cost themselves over a 20-year period, we might be talking less than $100 a year, and that's if we had to bear the entire cost. And I have some ideas. I'd like to think about this a little further, but I have some ideas on how we could maybe bring some other monies into play here and make it an even better deal for our citizens. But it looks to me like it's, I don't think we should automatically say it's a phase one, phase two project just because of funding. If it makes the most sense from a construction point of view and how you're going to, that was my other question. Once we start doing this, can we keep the system functioning while we're also working on it?
Yes.
But I think we ought to look at whatever makes the most sense from a cost and a construction perspective, whether there should be one phase or, in this case, two phases. I don't think we should rule out one phase just because of cost.
President Johnson, my recommendation would be to do it in one phase. I guess part of that's, like you're talking, was the funding and the economy of scale and the mobilization, but I think the other thing too is if Dickinson sees the growth that they're talking, and that happens in a short period of time within, say, 2-3 years, and if we do it a phased approach, we're kind of right back where we are today. We're kind of behind the 8 ball. We're trying to catch up. And if we don't have the facilities and the equipment in the process to handle the population growth, that may impact Dickinson's future to continue to grow and be a vital community.
So if we do this, tell us again what kind of population base this supports, do you think? Is this the 22,000 base?
Yep. Phase one was 22,000, and they and up to phase two of 26,180.
Couldn't get that to be 181, could you?
No.
What do you think? 26,180.
That extra person's out of luck.
And I have one more question. You're talking 61 households. That's just residential households? You're not talking about the motels and
That would be
all the-
properties, our meter counts are based on a single meter, so a motel would be one property.
Okay.
Commercial facility would be basically 1 meter, or the trailer court. So it's not based on the population, it's based on just an account.
Somehow I expect these costs will be tied to contribution to the sewage system somehow.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and there may be a combination of whether it's a fixed fee plus a percent or cost per 1,000 gallons, or a few things. So yeah, it'd be a number of different approaches.
Kind of like our streetlights?
This is based upon usage currently, right? When we bill for wastewater, isn't it? Or is it just a flat
There is
rate? Can't remember.
I think it's $2.20 is a fixed base rate, and then it's $1.60 per 1,000 on top of it. So, I mean, it's a minimal amount, and then
Right.
I don't remember exactly what 2010 changes are going to be, but there are changes where we're going to split residential and commercial out in 2010.
But the point is, a hotel or an industrial contributor is going to pay more probably than a
Yes.
single-family home.
Okay. Well, any other questions? It's been a good discussion, good, and it was a good report. I mean, really well put together and then presented very well this evening, so.
And then we will, after this is, number 4 is final, then we'll put all of our 4 tech memos into one master plan report for submission to the city. So that's the
Okay.
next step. And thank you very much.
Well, thank you. Looks like you've done a very good job.
Thanks.
Okay, that doesn't require any action. We'll go back to the non-timetable agenda, and item C has to do with an alcoholic beverage license. Mr. Kessel, would you like to introduce that, please?
Thank you, President Johnson. The remaining restaurant beer-only alcohol beverage license is from JD's Barbecue. They did not get their application submitted in time for the previous meeting. That application is now in order. They have paid all of their fees, and I would recommend approval of that beverage license.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Kessel. You've heard his recommendation. Is there a motion regarding this item?
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Second.
We have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. So we'll move to item D, West River Community Center financial assistance. I understand this was presented at the previous meeting. Mr. Kessel, anything else you'd like to present here?
Yes, President Johnson, the request that's been received from the Park Board comes from 2 different funds. The first is from the existing maintenance reserve. There's approximately $360,000 in that maintenance reserve currently. We have not made the 2009 allocation. We put in $100,000 per year. So that would increase the balance to $460,000. And if the request is approved this evening of just over $71,000, that would then leave a final balance of just under $390,000 in that maintenance reserve. They are also requesting just over $50,000 from the half-cent sales tax to help pay for the soccer and flag football complex. And that is from a different fund. That's not coming out of that same maintenance fund as the 2 previous requests were. So based upon the requests that they've made and the payer sources that we've outlined, it has been my recommendation to approve these requests.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. You've heard Mr. Kessel's recommendations. Do you have any comments or questions or a motion regarding this item?
You know, it's my understanding that this is exactly what was anticipated when the financing for the West River Community Center was put together. We're talking about 2 very different things here, but especially with the maintenance fund, the major repairs and maintenance. I'm wondering if somebody can explain that for the public maybe a little bit better than I can, what was anticipated 5 years ago, or 6, or whatever, whenever that was.
Well...
Am I right? This is
Yeah.
what we anticipated at the time?
No, I agree that this is, in a sense, how it was anticipated we would use these monies, but, you know, we're plowing new ground, so what we anticipated, it really is turning out to be quite a bit different, and I think we anticipated that we would have to do a operation subsidy, which we haven't had to do. And so this is really the first significant request in 5 years from the park board for funding when it came to major maintenance items. I think we anticipated that since the building was new and the equipment was new, that there wouldn't be too many requests early on. And certainly probably not anything very major. But now after 5 years, West River Community Center is, you know, had a lot of use, and so it's starting to experience some things. Not any one thing too large by itself, but Mr. Kessel and I had a discussion with Mr. Kramer and Mr. LaFleur a few weeks ago and said, you know, we probably need to define what major maintenance is now from their perspective. And as we talk with, you know, the building they're operating and the budget they operate with, anything like $1,000 or more is pretty significant for them. And so we said, well, why don't we use that as kind of a guideline here on a go-forward basis for a while. Those maintenance items that cost $1,000 or more, why don't you start a list and either try to budget for those on an annual basis or approach the commission once or twice a year with a request for funds from the maintenance fund. So this probably isn't exactly what we anticipated 5, 6, 7 years ago when we were planning, but we did anticipate that there would be monies needed for maintenance. You know,
that's what I referred to.
yeah, and the other request here on the soccer fields. The soccer fields were part of the original concept for the community center. The community center's campus. They didn't get done as quickly as we thought. We started, I know the Parks and Rec started quickly on them, but we ran into a water issue, finding enough water on that site where we could do the irrigation, and it took you a while to figure that out and resolve that, but I think we're ready to go. And again, just to refresh people's memories, we used to play soccer on a couple of temporary softball fields where Hawks Point is now, and we would have a lot of cars parked parallel on the street with a lot of little kids around, and a busy high school just north of there with kids who like to drive, and it was an unsafe situation, and we recognized as we were planning for the community center that those soccer fields needed to be part of that campus and that complex, and so I think it's appropriate that we contribute some monies from the half-cent sales tax for those soccer fields, because again, they were part of the original concept.
Do we need 2 separate motions?
Mr. Colling, do you think we need 2 separate motions to deal with this?
I think you can handle it in one motion.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
I move we approve the recommended, the requested financial assistance from Park District.
Second.
Okay, and I'm assuming that with that, that also includes which funds they're to be charged to.
That's correct.
Yeah, so per the Mr. Kessel's recommendation then. Okay, we have the motion, the second. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We'll go to item E, board committee appointments and reappointments. There's a list in our meeting books. I don't think there's anything you need to say about that list, do you? I mean, there's no changes to it.
That's correct, President Johnson. The list remains the same.
We just need a motion, if you're so inclined, to approve these appointments.
Can I just make one comment, Mr. President?
Yes, you may.
The Convention of Visitors Board, they have 12 members, and they're good members, but I still feel that they should have some motel owners on this board. In the couple meetings ago, I had done some research, and all of the cities have a minimum 3 to 6 motel managers or owners on their board, and I still feel that our CVB should make an effort to get some motel owners on this board.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Stuckert. Other comments?
I assume, I mean, with all these boards, it looks great, but I assume that there's somebody on staff that's looking to see that people have appropriate qualifications, and there is a little application form they do, is there not?
That is correct, Commissioner Jackson. They all fill out a form to indicate their interest. We don't do a full-fledged background check or anything of that nature. And oftentimes, we have the boards themselves make recommendations to people. There are a few of those that will be forthcoming because those boards haven't acted yet on the names that are coming forward.
Just so we know that the interest by an individual isn't a whimsical interest, that it's a serious desire and
That would be correct.
interest and all. We need a motion to approve?
Yes, we do. I don't think there was a motion.
So move.
Mr.
Second.
Jackson moves, Mrs. Stuckert seconds. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll act on the motion. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. We'll move to tab 5, Public Safety. Here from the Fire Department, Chief Sivak.
President Johnson, Commissioners, in addition to the November report that you have before you, I'd like to also mention that I was just recently made aware by letter that we were successful in a Department of Emergency Services grant application. This is a grant which again supports the regional response function that the City of Dickinson Fire Department finds itself in as far as how the state views us. We're going to be receiving $85,016. Part of the purchases that we'll be making for equipment with that money will include a quick response vehicle, a suburban type vehicle, to get at least 2 individuals on the road to an incident as soon as possible. Additional equipment that will be purchased with this money will also help us to transition to build and maintain more of an in-house based method of maintaining some of our equipment. If you remember, we talked not too long ago about some very high-tech monitoring equipment that, through talking with the state, we recognized was above the level of our department, and we were able to transfer that equipment to Minot. That equipment was very costly to maintain. We've been very fortunate throughout the grant process that we've maintained all of the equipment we have received from DES so far with grant monies. We're planning in the future that might not be the situation. We're trying to build an in-house program to help us maintain a lot of this equipment and to simplify some of the equipment we have, and some of the equipment purchases with this grant will help us down. Concerning the vehicle, at this point in time, the insurance, licensing, and maintenance costs of that vehicle, we do believe we have in our existing budget for 2010. Also, this time we'd like to just remind all of the citizens that ash dumpsters have been placed around town at the same locations as where we have the oil waste receptacles. We have had some incidents of dumpster fires, unfortunately related to the improper disposal of ashes. 'tis the season, so to speak. Once again, we'd like to remind everyone, if they're burning wood or coal, solid fuels of some kind, make sure that those ashes are in a metal container with a tight-fitting lid. Don't throw them into your residential or alley can dumpster. That's not what they're designed for. Even after several days, you cannot assume that the ashes are cold and safe. So just to remind everybody to be aware of that. And I didn't have time with the grant to do anything more than just verbally inform you of it. But that concludes my report.
Thank you. Chief, any comments or questions for the chief?
I have a question for you, Chief Sivak. Do you have addresses where these could be published somewhere? People, when they call and say, where can we dump ashes? I don't know.
If they're aware of the waste oil receptacle locations, there's one on 10th Avenue East, then there's one on Broadway. I'm not sure if there's a third one. Mr. Soren, are you aware of?
Down on 8th Avenue West, south of the Grass Softball Complex
Okay.
is one. There's one up by Remco Software on 23rd, I believe it is, north of Remco.
Okay. And I'd have to double check with Mr. Rapp. I do believe that all of those locations have the ash dumpsters. And we can post it on the website.
Thank you. That's
Okay.
what I was driving at.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Chief Rummel?
Good evening, Mr. President and Commissioners. Enclosed in your package, you will find the November 2009 Traffic Services Report. Not a lot to report on that. There were 55 accidents in November, and 3 of those were injury accidents. There were also a total of 54 school zone contacts in for the month of November. Recently, I too received the announcement that we did receive $108,503.45 in a grant from the North Dakota Department of Emergency Services. This grant was applied to for equipment and was focused on the tactical unit that we have in the Dickinson Police Department. Some of the equipment that we are going to get from this grant is a 3/4 ton 4x4 pickup, some mobile data terminal software, and upgrades to the mobile command post. Now, this is going to augment what we already have for equipment for the TAC team, and as you can see, there's a list attached to that memo of all the calls that our TAC team has received and answered since its inception in 2004. As you can see, these are all very serious in nature, and they have a high incident for disaster. But because of the training and the equipment we have received from DES particularly, we are able to conduct and successfully handle these situations. This is also a team that is state recognized and state certified, and therefore we are able to get this grant money, and also the team, if we are called outside our jurisdiction, to get reimbursed for wages and any other of those costs. So, with that, are there any questions on that particular report? And then, as you can see in the newspaper, we did conduct another liquor check on liquor establishments, and all 26 were successful and turned down our person, and I'm very pleased of that. So, overall, they're doing a nice job, and I commend them.
That's great. Has that ever happened before where we...
Not for a long time,
Not
sir.
for a long
No.
time.
Mm-mm. No. Not all of them like this. We don't usually check all of them, but on this particular case, we did, and they were all successful.
Well, I know they've started to card me, so...
I'm surprised they hadn't all the while.
Yeah, I was too.
Oh, boy. Oh, boy.
With that, I'll entertain any other questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Public Works, Engineering, Mr. Soren.
President Johnson, Commissioners, The only item I have under my report is the minutes from the Board of Adjustment meeting. Just to highlight one item out of there. As you are aware, they did drill an oil well south of the golf course that has been very successful, and a part of this meeting, they have approved the pipeline to transfer the oil and gas product from that site south to an existing well, which is going to eliminate the flare from the area as well as the truck traffic that's been on that road, which is probably not the most desirable facility to handle that kind of traffic. So they're hoping to start that within 3 to 6 weeks and get that project underway. Other than that, I'd be happy to answer any questions the commission might have.
Any questions for our chief engineer? Our city engineer? I guess you're city engineer, chief engineer?
You going to get to look at the route of that pipeline?
Yes. It'll go west to the section line and then south along the section line.
Just to make sure it makes sense from a planning standpoint.
Yep. Yes, we did look at that.
Other comments or questions? Okay, thank you, Mr. Soren. We'll move to tab 7, Public Works. Mr. Rapp.
Thank you, President Johnson. The first item you have, we reported on last commission meeting. We're notified by Southwest Water Authority that they were increasing their water rates by 5 cents per thousand. We are recommending that we pass that increase along to our customers, and that would raise our per thousand rate from $4.02 per thousand to $4.07 per thousand. Commissioner Jackson did ask at the last meeting is when is the last time that we took a rate increase on behalf of the city. We did some research and could not find anything in our records within recent history where the city has actually taken an increase. By memory, I believe it was probably about 1999. We took a 2 or 3 cent per thousand increase that was not related to Southwest Water, but we could not find anything within our records that gave a definite time frame.
The average household, this will be 30 cents?
About 35 cents on a 7,000 per gallon per month consumption.
I'll move we approve.
We have a motion and a second to approve the resolution. Any discussion? Hearing none, we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Second item before you is also reported on at the last city commission meeting was to implement a fee for residents that are hauling unsecured loads out to the Baylor building and ultimately out to the landfill. We've had a number of complaints along that route from debris and stuff that's blowing off those trucks, and it has increased our cost to clean up those areas. Our recommendation was to implement a fee for unsecured loads for a pickup would be $35 plus the cost of a tarp. A trailer that's 16 feet or longer would be a $50 cost plus the tarp, and then a truck would be a $75 charge. Even before implementing this fee with just the education out at the solid waste facility by staff, we've seen a great reduction in the number of loads that are coming in that are not tarped or not secured. So our recommendation would be to approve the resolution.
I have a question. So it's on a pickup, it's $35 plus whatever the cost of a tarp is?
Yep.
Well,
what we'd do, President Johnson, is would probably go to Walmart or one of the local vendors and just buy the cheap blue tarps, and so they're not driving to drive out there with an unsecured load, provide them with a tarp that they could cover that load with.
And we would add that cost to the fee?
Correct.
Okay.
I make a motion to approve resolution number 23-2009.
Is there a second?
Second, and I have a question.
Go ahead.
Trailers that are less than 16 feet,
Be charged the same as a pickup.
same as a pickup.
Yep.
So they're covered, that if we make a motion to approve this, shorter trailers are included.
Yep. Commissioner Friend, the other question that came up though too is if it's a pickup's full plus a trailer, what would the fee be? Then it'd basically be the greater.
Yeah, okay.
Or if they want to really get on it, we could add them both.
Okay.
But it's still cheaper than a $200 littering fee.
Yeah.
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner?
Mr. Rep, just clarification on the resolution, we're talking about unsecured loads to the city landfill. Now, are we talking the Baylor building as
Well,
one facility and the landfill?
Commissioner Steiner, all the material that goes out to landfill passes through our solid waste facility. The fees and things that are charged, if you're bringing material out there, they're weighed, and you're charged for that material.
Okay, but now for the person with an unsecured load in his pickup, if he bypasses the Baylor building, goes directly out to the landfill, are we not talking two different routes there?
They're not allowed to go direct out to landfill. If
They're
they
not
come-
allowed
If they
to
go
go.
out to landfill, they're basically sent back to the Baylor building,
Okay,
because they have to, we charge them for that material.
so it is going to be to the Baylor building and not the landfill.
So they pay a fee for whatever's in the back of their pickup bed, plus the $35, plus a tarp if they don't have a tarp.
Correct.
And if they have a tarp, they're just paying for the materials.
Whatever it'd be $29 per ton for residential garbage, and I'm not sure what the charge per ton is for construction material.
Okay.
So this is going to solve the problem between the Baylor building and the landfill only,
Yes.
really?
Well, Commissioner Jackson, it's going to solve the problem, because, anybody that's hauling material through town is going to basically ensure that they've got it
You're going to
secured.
educate, and, yeah. What are some examples of some loads that would not have to be secured?
Couch, furniture, large items that basically cannot blow off.
Bigger tree limbs?
Yeah, tree stumps. Even 2x4s that have nothing, that can come off them and blow away and stuff too, would not have to be secured.
I just find myself wondering who's going to be the judge.
Well, the complaints that I had gotten were nails, for one thing. People were getting flat tires because nails were blowing, and wood chips, wood pieces with nails, so those are things that'll fly
Commissioner
around.
Dukart, a lot of what comes off with nails and stuff too, especially shingles. When they're hauling shingles and stuff out, they blow off.
Okay, other discussion here? Let's see, did we have a motion to approve?
Yes.
And a second, okay.
One
Other
last thing.
Mr. Jackson?
Can we get a report in about 6 months as to how this is working?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else?
Good.
All right, we have the motion and the second. We'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Thank you. Next item on your agenda is to award the bid to CNS Construction for the 30-inch hydraulic line or transfer line between cells 3 and 4. If you recall, we actually bid this earlier in the year, and we're looking at doing a lot of directional boring, but because of the high cost of the boring, we elected to reject all those bids, redesign the project, and the project came in now within kind of what we expected for budget. But the CNS Construction's base bid was $699,310.51. With contingencies and engineering and everything, it brings up the total cost of that project to $838,526 so far. So our recommendation is to award the bid to CNS Construction.
Okay. Is this part of that $9 million, the recommendations that Altig had?
This was not part of that total
Okay,
cost.
so we're really looking at $9.8 million to do that total project? Okay.
I'll move we award the bid.
We have the motion to award the bid. Is there a second?
Second.
Other discussion? And when will you start on this?
As soon as they can award contracts. I do have the application from the state for the SRF funding that will have to get filled out and submitted to them, but as soon as the contractor feels that they want to get in and start, we'll be able to start.
Okay. All right. We have the motion second. You ready to vote? Okay, Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries.
Last item on the agenda, we did receive notification from Workforce Safety that we'd met all the requirements from a grant that we'd submitted earlier this year. This grant was basically geared towards more personal type protective equipment. We received a total of $45,037.36. I'd like to really express my sincere thanks to Chief Seevock for his help in submitting this grant, but especially all of our staff from all those departments that have worked very diligently on providing a healthy and safe work environment in those departments. They submitted a number of different pieces of equipment for review. We submitted that list to the state and we were successful in getting that. But over the last 3 years, that brings our total grant from workforce safety to $95,037.36. So this is actually the second grant we've received for safety equipment. With that, I have nothing further.
Very good. Well, as long as Mr. Rapp's here, do you have any comments or questions for him on any other items?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. That brings us to the city administrator's report. Mr. Kessel.
Thank you, President Johnson, Commissioners. The first item I'd like to mention is the receipt of a thank you notice from Afton Williamson's family. I'm sure, as you all recall, she was one of the 3 young ladies that passed away in that unfortunate incident involving the Dickinson State University students. The second item is a request to schedule a special budget amendment meeting schedule. We do this annually. I'd like to suggest next Monday, the 28th at 5:15, if that works with everybody's schedule. The meeting should take 15 minutes or less, if everything goes well.
And will that work? All right. Yeah. So make it so.
The third item is the city's PIO appointment to Western North Dakota's IMAT, or Incident Management Team. The IMAT team is and it's assistance team, not assessment team, as indicated on the agenda. These IMAT teams are the brainchild of the Department of Emergency Services at the state level. They are meant to assist communities like Dickinson and others who have experienced natural disasters that overwhelm local resources. They would assist with any number of things. One of those things is public information. Our PIO, Bill Falsing, served in that capacity during our tornado. He was instrumental in making media arrangements. We had daily, in fact, we had twice daily press conferences to inform the public, and he was instrumental in doing that. So he has been recommended and approved for being the Western North Dakota IMAT team rep. What that means is they will send him to training, basically PIO school, and when and if the unfortunate need comes time, he would then be asked to go to wherever that event occurred. When and if he does go, he would be on the state's payroll at that time. So we received assistance from other communities, City of Mandan, some other counties that helped. In our time of need, this I thought would be a nice thing to help return that favor. The next item is the Dickinson. The City of Dickinson now has a Facebook fan page. If you are not a fan, please become one. It's a way to further distribute information regarding the city, fun facts, meetings, things of that nature. I'm happy to report that even Governor Hoeven is a fan of the City of Dickinson. So if you are not, please become one. The next item is the voting precinct map. Although there was no supporting evidence in your book, I did distribute prior a letter received from Alice Schultz from Stark County requesting that we make a change in our voting precincts, and the map that you've included, or that I've included there, shows those changes. She would like us to take action before the end of 2009, so this is an agenda item that I would like to add to that Monday meeting that you just scheduled, so that we would not only do the budget amendments, but we'd also consider this map and the changes that are affected. Really what it is taking the eastern side of Dickinson and adding it to the southern side. What that does, there's about a dozen people that actually live in that section, and it's on your map. It's the purple section that has the crosses or the thatching in it. They currently are part of the blue section on the map, and we'd like to change those and add them to the southern part. The reason is, if you look at the legislative districts, they are in the same legislative district as the southern side anyways, and since they've moved to election centers, you can now vote at any of the election centers listed on that map, regardless of the precinct that you live in. If there's questions, I'd certainly like to address those now. I do have one item that I'd like to add to the agenda this evening that's not there. Because 3 of the 4 of the last reports all included grants, I didn't want to feel left out. I found out today by letter that the City of Dickinson will be getting a $20,000 grant from the Office of the Adjutant General to help replace the roof at the Armory. If you recall, we had a lot of water leaking in that roof this summer, and this grant, along with the Department of Energy grant that we wrote earlier, we should have enough funds to replace that roof and have a new one for years down the road. So that would conclude my report unless there's any questions of any of the items that I've presented.
Thank you, Mr. Kessel. Any comments or questions for the city administrator? We did note that your grant was quite a bit smaller than the others.
But no operating costs.
No. I think there's going to be a big match on our part to do that Armory. So. Okay, tab 9, accounts payable and payroll. Are there any accounts payable that you wish to discuss?
I'd just like to make a comment, Mr. President, about the Boy Scout troop. I think their project is done on the corner. It looks marvelous, and I'd like to compliment him and his helpers. I saw a lot of people working there at different times. It was really cold, and it made a great improvement for people that are coming off the interstate into our city. And with that, I'll approve it.
Okay, we have the motion to approve accounts payable and payroll. Is there a second?
Second.
With the motion second, we'll vote. Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Go to tab 10, City Commission reports. First, I'll ask if there's any reports by city commissioners not on the agenda.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Frenzel.
I would like to take a moment and wish the mayor, my fellow commissioners, and the staff a very Merry Christmas, as well as the viewing public. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Frenzel.
And I'd like to do the same. Merry Christmas to everyone out there for all your calls and emails in support as well as questions. And I made it through my first year of training now. I hope after this I don't have to ask as many questions and tell you I'll call you back because I can figure it out on my own. And I haven't missed one meeting, so I'm real proud of myself.
Mr. Steiner, anybody you want to wish Merry Christmas to? And
I don't have many friends out there, but I'll just say Merry Christmas.
okay, so you're Merry Christmas to that friend of yours then, okay?
It's been a good year.
Mr. Jackson?
Well, I'm kind of glad that Joe started that. And you know, at risk of being a little too serious, we have a lot to be thankful for in this community. It's a good time of year to acknowledge that. So, yes, Merry Christmas.
And to make it unanimous, Merry Christmas too. So.
5-5-0, huh?
Well, on the agenda, we have the city administrator's performance review and 2010 salary allocation. All the commissioners did complete a performance review for Mr. Kessel. Their copies are all in your book. Just for the public purpose, I did put together a composite here, and we rate the performance review in, let's see, it's 7 areas: leadership, management, job knowledge, communication skills, professional development, relationship building with city employees, and relationship building with community. And our rating is just simply, do you exceed expectations, meet expectations, or does not meet expectations? Well, I'm happy to report that Mr. Kessel received no, does not meet expectations in any of these 7 areas. In leadership, 4 commissioners ranked him as exceeding their expectations. 1 is meeting. In management, he was ranked with 4 exceeds expectation, 1 meets. In job knowledge, he received 2 exceeds expectations and 3 meets expectations. Communication skills, 4 ranked him as exceeding expectations, 1 as meeting expectations. In the area of professional development, 2 exceeds and 3 meets. In relationship building with city employees, he had 3 exceeds and 1 meets, and 1 commissioner didn't feel that a ranking could be marked in that one. Relationship building with the community, 3 exceeds and 2 meets. And in the comment sections for each of these, the comments, I think, were all very complimentary towards Mr. Kessel. In the area of leadership, many commissioners comment on the quality of your leadership during the snowstorms, the tornado, and the DSU student deaths. Felt that you showed good leadership there. In terms of management, commissioners commented on the city's reorganization efforts, public transit, which we heard about tonight, your problem-solving skills, and recognizing that Mr. Kessel does not appear to be a micromanager. In terms of job knowledge, commissioners recognize that Mr. Kessel, prior experience at Wapaton City as Wapaton City Administrator, and that served him well in his Dickinson position. And I think especially so with the tornado, it was pretty apparent that you had been through disasters before, perhaps not a tornado, but having gone through flooding disasters, that helped you in dealing with our situation. Communication skills, commissioners generally noted that Mr. Kessel has excellent communication skills. Professional development, commissioners noted that Mr. Kessel is well informed about city government and is active in professional associations. Relationship building with city employees, commissioners commented they have not received complaints from city employees and that Mr. Kessel seems to have the respect of city employees. In terms of relationship building with the community, commissioners commented that relationships with city citizens and others are good. They noted he does a good job at building relationships, and I know especially through the tornado where we had lots of folks from outside the community here to help us, whether they were from the federal government or the congressional delegation staff or the governor and the governor's office. I had several comments that I heard received about how well Mr. Kessel was doing in handling the situation. And so you seem like you really have established a good rapport, not only with our community of Dickinson, but the greater community here within our region in the state of North Dakota. So it looks like a pretty good performance review. I think I'm certainly leaning towards keeping you another year. I suspect at least 2 others are here. So, as a salary adjustment, included a memo in your meeting binder. We've got some information from our peer group cities and other cities. Mr. Kessel's salary this year has been $85,000. In our budget book, we increased the city wage matrix by 2%, and then in addition to that, employees get whatever horizontal step increases due them. I'm suggesting that Mr. Kessel receive the same 2% plus a step increase of another $1,700 for a total increase of $3,400. That's my recommendation. Certainly open it up for comments regarding the performance review and your comments regarding where you think his salary should be for next year. So anyone like to comment?
Mr. President,
Mr. Steiner.
I feel very comfortable with the job Mr. Kessel has done, and I really, looking at the rank and here where they go in the cities, and I don't really put so much into that, but I do see it's a fair salary. Obviously, I think he's done an excellent job with the city, and I would recommend that, I would go along with your recommendation here on his salary. Providing the next year the disasters aren't, and I don't know if there's more of a coincidence with you coming here and the disasters that we've had or not, but we'll take a look the next year.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Steiner. Other comments?
I'd recommend it also. He definitely stepped right in and took over. And everything I give Sean, he takes care of immediately. The only thing I'd like to see different is that we'd have some heat for our meetings and we'd have some hot coffee. And I think Commissioner Jackson agrees with me. It must be this corner over here.
Other comments? Okay. We've had, two of you have said you're comfortable with the recommendation for salary. Mr. Frenzel, Mr. Jackson? You're okay?
I'm comfortable with that, yes.
I'll move we approve the recommendation.
Second.
We have the motion to approve and the second. Any other discussion? Hearing none, then we'll vote. Mr. Jackson?
Aye.
Mrs. Stuckert?
Aye.
Mr. Frenzel?
Aye.
Mr. Steiner?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Motion carries. Is there anybody from the public that would like to address the commission? If so, you can step to the podium, state your name, and we'll hear your comments. No one from the public that would like to address us, so Chair to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Is there a second?